At my father's funeral, my older brother stood up to give the eulogy and wept so beautifully that half the church was crying with him. He spoke about devotion. He spoke about being there until the very end. He spoke about how much our father had loved him. And every single word of it was a lie, and I was the only person in that room who knew it. Until our father, who had planned for this exact moment, reached up from his own coffin and told everyone the truth himself. My name is Daniel Okafor. I'm 44 years old. And this is the story of how my brother performed a son's grief he had never actually felt, at the funeral of a father he had abandoned and robbed, and how our father made sure that the last word at his own funeral would be his. Let me tell you about my father first, because he deserves to be more than the prop my brother tried to make him at that service. His name was Samuel. He came to this country with almost nothing, and he built a life as a carpenter, a real one, the kind who made furniture that outlasts the people who buy it. He had hands like worn leather and a laugh you could hear across a room, and he believed that a man's worth was in what he built and how he treated people, not in what he said about either. He raised my brother Marcus and me mostly on his own after our mother passed, working impossible hours, never once making us feel the weight of what he carried. He was not a perfect man, but he was a good one, in the deep way that matters, and he loved his two sons with everything he had. My brother Marcus is 5 years older than me, and Marcus learned, very early, a thing that I never learned and never wanted to, that our father's love could be performed for, and that performing for it was easier than earning it. Marcus was the one who made the grand gestures, the loud declarations, the dramatic visits full of promises. And our father, who had a tender heart under all that worn leather, wanted so badly to believe in his older son that he forgave, again and again, the gap between what Marcus said and what Marcus did. I was the quieter son. I didn't make speeches, I just showed up. And in a family, the quiet one who shows up is very often the one who goes unthanked, because showing up, done consistently, starts to look like furniture. Always there, easy to stop seeing. I remember one birthday of our father's, maybe 15 years ago, that tells you everything. Marcus had promised for weeks to come home for it. Made a great show of it on the phone, our father lighting up every time he mentioned it. The day came. Marcus didn't. Some opportunity had come up, something more important, and he called late in the evening full of beautiful apologies and promises to make it up double. Our father forgave him instantly, gratefully, the way he always did. And the thing is, I was there. I had been there all day. I'd brought the cake, cooked the dinner, sat with him. But the entire evening, what my father talked about was how proud he was of Marcus for calling, how busy and important Marcus had become. I had given him the actual day, Marcus had given him a phone call and an excuse, and it was the phone call my father cherished. I wasn't angry, even then. I just understood, young, that this was how it was going to be. The one who is always there becomes invisible precisely because he is always there. For most of our adult lives, this arrangement held a kind of balance. Marcus lived in another state, building his career and his image, calling on holidays with grand sentiment. I lived 20 minutes from our father, and I was simply there for the Sunday dinners, the doctor's appointments, the leaking roof, the ordinary fabric of a life shared. I want to be clear that I didn't resent this. I treasured it. The years I spent close to my father were a gift. I tell you about the imbalance, not to complain about it, but because it is the soil out of which my brother's betrayal grew. The betrayal began when our father's health started to decline, about 3 years before he died, and it began the way these things so often do, disguised as help. When it became clear that our father could no longer fully manage on his own, I assumed I would continue doing what I had always done, being there day to day, managing his care. But Marcus, to my surprise, suddenly became very involved. He took a sudden, intense interest in our father's finances and living situation. He argued that Dad should not be relying on me, that it was too much burden on me, that as the older son he, Marcus, would take charge of things properly. He moved our father's accounts to a bank near him. He took over the finances, the bill paying, the legal paperwork. He even, over a period of months, persuaded our father to move, to leave the home and the neighborhood he'd lived in for 30 years, away from me and his friends and his church, to a place near Marcus, several states away, where Marcus could look after him properly. I objected. I objected strongly, but I was outmaneuvered, because Marcus framed every objection I raised as selfishness, as my not wanting to give up control, as my being unwilling to let our father be cared for the right way. And our father, caught between his two sons, and flattered by the sudden devotion of the older one he'd always longed to be close to, went along with it. He moved away. And I let it happen, because I could not, without making a terrible scene, stop a grown man from choosing to live near his own son. That was the last period I had easy access to my father. After the move, everything changed. Because the move, I would learn much later, was never about care. It was about control and isolation. Once our father was relocated near Marcus and away from me, a slow, deliberate isolation began. My calls to my father became harder to complete. Marcus, or his wife, Vanessa, always seemed to be screening, always had a reason it wasn't a good time. My visits were managed, supervised, cut short. When I did see my father, he seemed more confused, more medicated, more diminished each time, and increasingly cut off from the world he'd known. Marcus controlled all the information now, the doctors, the finances, the access, and he used that control to slowly wall our father off from everyone who might have noticed what was actually happening, including me, especially me. What was actually happening was that my brother was draining him. I did not have proof then. I only had the instinct of a son who knew in his bones that something was deeply wrong, and the helplessness of a man who had been successfully cast by his own brother as the difficult, untrustworthy one whom no one needed to listen to. I would call. I would be deflected. I would worry. And the months passed, and my father slipped further away, and I was kept too far from him to do anything but grieve a man who was still alive. There was one visit I'll never forget, because it was the moment I understood, fully, what was being done. I had flown out, unannounced, because I couldn't bear the screening any longer. I drove to Marcus's house, and knocked, and Vanessa answered, and I could see the flicker of alarm before she smoothed it into a smile. She told me Dad was resting, and not really up for visitors, and that I should have called ahead. I insisted. And when I finally got into the back room where they had him, my father was sitting in a chair by the window, smaller than I'd ever seen him, and when he looked up at me, his face did something that broke my heart. It lit up with recognition and joy. And then, a half-second later, clouded with a confused kind of guilt, as though he'd been told things about me that didn't match the son standing in front of him. "Daniel," he said, "they told me you didn't want to come." I knelt by his chair and told him that wasn't true, that I had been trying to reach him for months, and I watched him try to hold on to that, try to reconcile it with whatever he'd been told, and I saw how tired and frightened he was. This strong man who'd built furniture that outlasted people, now unsure of what was real. Vanessa appeared in the doorway within minutes to say the visit was tiring him. I was gone within the hour. I drove to the airport and sat in the parking lot and wept, because I knew exactly what I was seeing and I could not prove a word of it. What was actually happening was that my brother was draining him, and I was watching it happen through a window Marcus had built specifically so that I could see just enough to suffer and not enough to stop it. My father died on a cold morning in February. Marcus called me to tell me, and even in that call, even then, I could hear it, a performance of grief that rang somehow false, too composed in its theatrics, like a man who had rehearsed his lines. I flew out for the funeral with my heart in pieces, not only from losing my father, but from the terrible knowledge that I had lost him twice, once to the slow isolation, and now to death, with so much unsaid and unresolved between the distance Marcus had built. And then came the funeral, and the eulogy. I want to describe it to you, because it was a masterpiece of a particular kind of evil, the kind that wears the face of love. My brother stood at the front of that church, before our father's friends and family and community, and he delivered a eulogy of breathtaking, weeping devotion. He spoke of the precious final years he'd been blessed to spend caring for our father. He spoke of holding his hand at the end. He spoke, with a catch in his voice, of how grateful he was to have been the son who was there. He painted himself as the devoted child who had given everything. And, without ever saying my name, he painted me, by contrast and by omission, as the son who hadn't been around, who'd let his big brother carry the burden alone. The church ate it up. People wept. People reached out to squeeze Marcus's shoulder as he returned to his seat. This brave, devoted, grieving son. And I sat there, in the second row, my hands shaking, knowing that every word was an inversion of the truth, and that I had no way to say so that wouldn't look like a jealous, grieving brother making an ugly scene at a funeral. Marcus had me trapped, exactly as he'd planned. To tell the truth would be to become the villain of his story in real time. So I said nothing. I sat with it. And I have never been so grateful for anything in my life as I am for the fact that I said nothing, because my father, it turned out, had something to say, and he had arranged, long before, to say it at exactly this moment. After Marcus sat down, the officiant, our father's longtime pastor, a steady old man named Reverend Coker who had known our family for decades, stepped to the front, and he said that before the service concluded, he had a duty to perform. He explained that some months before his death, our father had come to him and to his lawyer, a Mr. Adebayo, who was also present, and had left a letter sealed with firm instructions that in the event of his death it was to be read aloud, in full, at his funeral, before the gathered family and community. Our father had been very specific, Reverend Coker said. The letter was to be read by the Reverend himself, publicly, no matter what. Mr. Adebayo, the lawyer, stood and confirmed it, and confirmed that our father had been entirely of sound mind when he wrote it, and had it witnessed and notarized precisely so that no one could later claim otherwise. I saw my brother go very still. Reverend Coker opened the letter, and he began to read, and my father's voice, his real voice, plain and direct, and unmistakably him, filled that church one last time. To everyone gathered here, the letter began. If you are hearing this, then I have died, and you have come to say goodbye, and I thank you for that. I am going to use these last words to tell the truth, because I have learned that the truth said too late is still better than the truth never said at all. And I have a few things that must be said while you are all in one room. The church had gone completely silent. I want to talk about my two sons. My father's letter continued, because I know that at this funeral, things will have been said, and I want to make sure that the record is set right by the only person who has the standing to set it right, which is me. My son Marcus will have told you, I expect, that he cared for me in my final years. I want to tell you what actually happened, because I was there, and I am the one who knows. I watched Marcus's face drain of all its color. 3 years ago, the letter went on. Marcus came to me and convinced me to leave my home, my church, my friends, and my son Daniel, and to move across the country to live near him, so that he could care for me. I went, because I am an old fool who always wanted Marcus to love me the way he was now pretending to, and I let myself believe it. It was the worst decision of my life, because Marcus did not move me close to care for me, he moved me close to control me. Once I was there, away from everyone who knew me, he took over my money, my medical decisions, and my contact with the outside world. He kept my son Daniel, the son who had been at my side, faithfully, every ordinary day for 20 years, away from me, screening his calls, cutting short his visits, and telling me things about Daniel that I slowly came to understand were not true. He isolated me, and while I was isolated, he took from me. A sound went through the church, a kind of collective intake of breath. I want to be specific, because vagueness protects the guilty, my father's letter said, and I could hear, even in the Reverend's careful reading, my father's Carpenter bluntness. Over the 2 years that Marcus controlled my finances, he moved into his own accounts, or spent on himself, approximately $280,000 of my savings, the savings of a lifetime of building furniture with my own hands. He did this while telling me my money was being managed, and while telling everyone else what a devoted son he was. He also arranged, near the end, to have the deed to my house, the house I built additions onto with my own hands, transferred in a way that would have left Daniel with nothing, and Marcus with everything. I discovered this, in a brief window of clarity, about 8 months ago, and that is when I went to Mr. Adebayo, quietly, and I made the arrangements that have led to this letter being read to you now. I was weeping, not from grief now, but from the almost unbearable relief of being seen, of my father, from beyond death, reaching out to lift the false story off of me in front of everyone who had just believed it. To my son Daniel, the letter said, and Reverend Coker's voice softened. Daniel, the first owe you an apology that I am ashamed I can only give you this way, when it is too late to see your face. I let your brother convince me to leave you. I let him tell me lies about you, and to my shame, a part of me believed them, because I was frightened, and confused, and far from home. You were the son who showed up. Every ordinary day, for 20 years, you showed up. And I took it for granted, the way we always take for granted the people who never make us beg for their love. You were the best of me. And I am so sorry that I did not see it clearly until I was alone in a strange place, realizing that the son I had chosen over you was stealing from me, while the son I had neglected was the one still trying to reach me through the wall your brother built. Forgive me if you can. You were always enough. You were always the one who was truly there. I could not see, for the tears, but I could hear, in the silence around me, the sound of an entire community rearranging everything they thought they knew. And to Marcus, the letter continued, and here my father's voice, even read aloud by an old pastor, took on a quality of granite. I am not writing this to destroy you. I am writing it because the truth has a right to exist, and because I will not allow my own funeral to be used as the final stage for a performance of love you never gave me. I have already taken the legal steps to undo what you did. Mr. Adebayo has the details, and he will share them with both of you after this service. The house, and what remains of my estate, will go where it should have gone. And the matter of the $280,000 is now in the hands of people whose job it is to look into such things. I loved you, Marcus. I loved you so much that I let you fool me for years. But I was a builder, and a builder knows that you cannot make something true and lasting out of a lie, no matter how beautifully you weep over it. Goodbye, my sons. Be better to each other than this. Daniel, thank you. Marcus, I forgive you, but I will not let you get away with it. Those two things can both be true. I am proof of it. Reverend Coker folded the letter. The silence in that church is the loudest thing I have ever experienced. And then, slowly, every head turned, not toward me, the son who had been quietly maligned, but toward Marcus, the son who had just been revealed, in our Father's own unmistakable voice, witnessed and notarized, and beyond any possible denial, as a thief who had isolated and robbed a dying man and then wept crocodile tears over his coffin. There was no scene. No one shouted. It was worse than that for Marcus. It was the quiet, total, simultaneous withdrawal of an entire community's belief. I watched my brother shrink in his pew under the weight of 40 pairs of eyes that had, 60 seconds earlier, been full of sympathy for him. He had built his whole life on the performance of being good. And our Father, with a single letter, had pulled the curtain down in front of everyone whose belief that performance depended on. Here is what happened after. Mr. Adebayo, the lawyer, was as good as my father's word. My father, in his window of clarity 8 months before his death, had executed new documents, a new will, and a reversal of the fraudulent transfer of the house, all properly witnessed and notarized, all designed to survive exactly the challenge Marcus might bring. The house came to me, as my father wanted. The remainder of the estate was divided as our father had, finally, clearly directed, and the matter of the missing $280,000, the systematic draining of a vulnerable elderly man's accounts by the person holding his power of attorney, was, as my father had arranged, referred to the authorities. Financial exploitation of an elder is not merely a family grievance. It is, in most places, a serious crime. Marcus spent the following period of his life dealing with consequences far heavier than a bad eulogy. Marcus tried, of course, to contest the will, to claim our father had been confused, manipulated, not himself. It went nowhere. Our father had anticipated that exact move and had armored against it. The notarized letter, the documented clarity, the lawyer's testimony. The man who'd spent his life making things that lasted had made one final thing, and he had made it to last. I did not celebrate. There is no celebration in any of this. I had lost my father, and now I had lost my only brother too. Not to death but to the truth, which is sometimes the more permanent loss. But I had been given something I had stopped hoping for. I had been seen. My father had known, in the end. He had known which son showed up, and he had used his last act on this earth to say so, out loud, in front of everyone, so that the false story could never harden into history. I live in his house now. I work with my hands in the workshop he built, among his tools, learning slowly to make the kind of furniture he made, the kind that outlasts the people who make it. And on the wall of that workshop, framed, is the letter. Not as a trophy, as a reminder that the truth, written down by a careful man and timed to arrive when it cannot be silenced, is the most durable thing a person can build. The first piece I ever finished in that workshop was a simple bench, and I made it badly. The joints were loose, the proportions were off, and I could almost hear my father laughing at it in the kindest way. But I kept it. It sits by the front door of his house, which is my house now, and I sit on it sometimes in the evenings, the way he and I used to sit on his porch. I think he would rather I kept the clumsy bench I made than buy a perfect one, because he was a man who valued the thing you actually built with your own hands over the thing that merely looked good. That, in the end, was the whole difference between his two sons, and he knew it, and he made sure everyone else knew it too. I want to leave you with the thing my father taught me, in death, that he had been too tender-hearted to act on in life. Performance can fool almost everyone, almost all of the time. The loud son, the weeping son, the son who makes the grand declarations, will very often be believed over the quiet one who simply, faithfully, shows up. The world is dazzled by the performance of love and blind to the boring, daily substance of it. But there is one place the performance always fails, in the end, and that is in front of the person being performed for, if that person is paying attention. My father was paying attention. He let himself be fooled for years because he wanted the love to be real. But he was, underneath the tenderness, a builder. And a builder knows the difference between a thing that is solid and a thing that is only painted to look solid. And when he finally understood that his older son was a beautiful coat of paint over nothing, he did what builders do. He told the truth about the structure, plainly, so that the people relying on it would know what was actually holding it up. And it turned out, the thing holding it up, the whole time, was the quiet son nobody had been looking at. My name is Daniel Okafor. My brother performed a love he never gave at the funeral of the father he robbed, and nearly made me the villain of his story in front of everyone I knew. He forgot that the one person who saw through him had arranged to have the last word. My father spoke at his own funeral, and the truth he had been too gentle to say in life, he made permanent in death. If this story meant something to you, stay a while. There are more like it here. Stories about the people who perform love instead of giving it, and the quiet, devastating moment the truth they buried stands up and speaks for itself. No shouting, no scenes, just a letter, a silent room, and a good man's last word. Subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.